Good evening, Papua New Guinea, and welcome back to another episode of Business PNG. We continue our coverage of the 2019 PNG Investment Week, this time with a panel from the second Speakers Investment Summit, a panel on the East, West, and Papua New Guinea and the geopolitics in the region.
Gentlemen, I'll start on the far left with Jonathan and work our way to Honorable Agarobe. Big bar there when it comes to Chinese investment that Clarence identified. And again, we saw the state visit last year prior to the leaders that more closer government and business and government-to-government engagements from Beijing and Waigani. Jonathan, quite a fair bit of your tone has been one of caution. Please, is it an opportunity or is it a caution?
Great question. Well, why don't I take a step back and talk about the broader geopolitical context that we all find ourselves in Asia Pacific. Yep. And because it is really, we are at a profound moment in geopolitics in our region. The Port Moresby Summit at the APEC Port Moresby Summit was an important chapter in a story of a world at a turning point. Globalization and the liberal economic order is really under siege. Tensions between the US and China are now at an all-time high. Sitting in the media hall at Taurama, as the US Vice President Mike Pence warned that the roads lead nowhere, the belt will choke you, and you will drown in a sea of debt, really left the room stunned. And great language, but very powerful and direct language as well. Myself, alongside hundreds of journalists from across the Asia-Pacific region, were really wondering if we were witnessing history here. With the APEC summit leading to the first time no joint communique had been released from that meeting, an outcome that really seemed inevitable no matter what country hosted the summit, one was left wondering how countries can collectively find a way forward to maintain peace and prosperity in the world. The middle ground that we all cling to seems to be evaporating, crumbling beneath our feet. Geopolitically, APEC now seems a distant memory. The world is rapidly changing. Often it seems 140 characters at a time. That's a Twitter joke for anyone out there, and it's a Facebook country. For much of the past 70 years, the US has been the dominant power in Asia. Not without its hiccups, this era has heralded a massive expansion of international trade in which many countries, including China, Australia, and Papua New Guinea, have greatly benefited from. This paradigm has now dramatically changed with the rapid growth, economic growth of China. China has totally changed since it started opening up 40 years ago. Its GDP per capita has grown by more than 25 times. When you adjust for inflation, that's a near doubling per year. And over that time, China has brought 850 million people out of poverty. This is truly a remarkable story. China is now the second largest economy in the world. This growth has brought many benefits to the world. China has become the manufacturing base for the world, lowering costs of goods for consumers across the globe. It is also an insatiable market. Both Australia and Papua New Guinea have benefited tremendously from our trade relationships with China. China's success has brought with it far fewer challenges than a failed Chinese state would have brought to the world, but it has brought challenges nonetheless. China's growth has shifted the strategic balance and the economic centre of gravity in the world, and the shift is only increasing in speed. Both China and the world have to quickly adjust to this new reality. China has to recognise that it is in a totally new situation created by its own success. It can no longer expect to be treated the same way as in the past, when it was much smaller, it was much poorer, it was much weaker. Chinese officials absolutely hate being called a superpower, but as the old saying goes, if you walk like a duck, if you swim like a duck, and if you talk like a duck, well, then you're probably a duck. China is unquestionably a superpower. China has gained immensely from the international system and now has a substantial stake in upholding it and making it work for the global community. The rest of the world too has to adjust for a larger role for China. Countries have to accept that China will continue to grow and strengthen, and that it is neither possible nor wise to prevent them from letting this happen. If China is not given adequate say in existing institutions like the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, then it will create its own new institutions where it will have its say. New rules will have to be created because China sees many rules of today having been created in the past without its participation. Given their size, this is fair enough. The US, as the incumbent superpower, faces the most difficult adjustment. It's not easy to make room. As the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, noted in his opening address at this year's Shangri-La Dialogue, an Asian security summit held annually in Singapore, he said, "The bottom line is that the US and China need to work together, and with other countries too, to bring the global system up to date and not to upend the system." This sentiment was fervently supported by Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and I believe is one shared by almost every nation in the Indo-Pacific region wedged between these two giants. The problem is that despite huge, obvious and mutual benefits of the US and China working together to create something new, in which we can all continue to prosper, fault lines in areas of cyber espionage, 5G technology, freedom of navigation, human rights and trade have taken us to an impasse that appears insurmountable.
I'm Leanne Durari in Karaita Village, Kerema, and you're watching Business PNG.
No side is blameless in this. On the US side, President Trump's Twitter diplomacy is riddled with so many inconsistencies that it is impossible to know what their position will be from one day to the next. China is not much better. The political system is so opaque that in early May, when negotiators on both sides thought they had reached an agreement on a year-long trade negotiation of a 150-page deal, the Politburo of China, the organising committee of China, met and dramatically changed their position, sending back to the US a revised deal in a sea of red that was half the original length that was sent to them, so about 70 pages. This led to President Trump announcing a new range of tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods. In a globalised world, the thinking went that such integrated trade networks would be the ballast in international relationships, preventing countries from conflict because the cost to both sides would be so great. We are now in a world where trade has become the battleground, and the broader bilateral relationship is being contaminated. The great hope of China's rise was a convergence into the international system. If things continue as they are, we are instead heading for a more divided and troubled world. Instead of convergence, we run the risk of bifurcation, or a new Cold War, where the two worlds will split. Unfortunately, for all of us in the middle, there is a strong hardening of attitudes in the US. Key strategic documents from the US now label China as a revisionist power and their strategic competitor. There is bipartisan sentiment now that China has taken advantage of the US for too long, that its political system will never converge with liberal values, and that it is now to be contained before it's too late and before it becomes too powerful. This is not just the opinion of the White House, but it is increasingly that of all major US institutions. And it is spreading further abroad. The EU recently labelled China as a systemic rival. Australia is also taking hard stances on China from areas ranging from foreign interference to 5G. The goodwill that China's economic miracle has maintained for so long has now evaporated. Views are also hardening in China. China is surrounded by US military bases. They see the US as trying to thwart their legitimate ambitions. They are convinced that there is no middle ground to be found, that the US will never be satisfied. Nationalist sentiment in China is growing, fueled by a state-controlled media. The fundamental problem here is that between China and the US is a breakdown in trust, and we are all caught in the middle. The problem with the narrative of us heading to a new Cold War is that China is vastly different from Russia in a number of ways, the most important being the extensive economic and trade links it has with the rest of the world. All US allies in Asia, including Australia, have China as their largest trading partner. All friends of the US in Asia have China as their largest trading partner. None of us want China and the US at odds with one another. We want to be friends to both. We want to maintain security and economic ties with the US as we grow our business links with China. In a new Cold War, it would be impossible to split Asia down the middle or the Pacific Ocean down the middle. And even if it were, both Australia and Papua New Guinea would be caught on the wrong side of that split. Even without all-out conflict, any prolonged tension will be extremely damaging. There are many international problems, most importantly climate change, where everyone needs to work together. But both sides face increasing domestic pressures. In the US, an ever-fractured society. In China, the never-ending pressure for growth and prosperity. That it is very difficult to find consensus. Neither side can be seen as being weak. So what can we in the middle do? Well, individually, the remaining 19 economies of APEC have little influence over the two gorillas, but we are not without agency. It is more critical now than ever for smaller countries to work together to deepen economic cooperation, strengthen regional integration, and build up multilateral institutions. Encouraging not only bilateral but regional trade is crucial. We must also work to encourage Chinese initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative to be a vehicle for constructive engagement with the world. Australia is not a member of BRI, but Papua New Guinea is. Just look at the graph you mentioned. A lot of that has been driven by BRI investments. I would encourage you all to work in every instance to make sure that projects are economically sound, are commercially viable, and will bring long-term benefits to PNG. There are too many existing cases of BRI projects that have not achieved these fundamental principles, both here in PNG and in broader Asia. China has said they want BRI to be open, green, and clean. It's up to all of you, to those engaged with BRI, to hold them to account. So of course, deal with China. Squeeze everything that you can out of every relationship, but don't forget about the bigger picture we are all now participating in. The US-China relations are going to be a defining dynamic of this century. Many are now arguing that compromise is not possible or even desirable, that we are too different, that Chinese values are not only incompatible but detrimental to US values. This sentiment is permeating in Australia as well as the US, but we cannot succumb to this trap in which conflict is inevitable because we will all end up losers. The only way forward is for middle countries like Australia and Papua New Guinea is to hold on to that middle ground with all of the power that we have and to support the institutions in which China and the US can work together to solve the world's challenges, not to create more of them. So hopefully that's given you a bit more of a broader context and where PNG and Australia fit. And I'm happy to go into a bit more detail, but I'm conscious we have other panelists here.
Thanks, Jonathan.
I'm Leanne Durari in Brisbane, and you're watching Business PNG.
We'll probably get Charles involved in the conversation. Your commentary has seen a much more opportunistic position for PNG. Is the middle ground that Jonathan's espousing cautious, or should the drive and the opportunities of the Belt Road Initiative be an important factor, given the two governors that are about to speak have immense challenges on infrastructure, and the BRI provides those opportunities? Charles?
Thank you, moderator, and good morning good afternoon. It's already afternoon. Look, I'd like to split this issue into two. One is geopolitical perspective, one is more economics. The geopolitical perspective is quite a short one here, and I think Jonathan has given you a long story on that. We don't have elephants, but I'll use an elephant analogy. In Africa, I'm told that when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. So in this case, when the two elephants you're talking about fight, it's not grasses but human beings, like the 8 million Papua New Guineans that the Prime Minister talked about, or the 20 million Australians, or our closest neighbor, Indonesia, to the west. We, or the rest of the world, it's the human beings that will suffer. So I think my message to those two superpowers would be that at the end of the day, they should exercise basic respect for humanity. Simple as that. Whatever you do, basic respect for humanity. So in that geopolitical space, it's elephants that are going to fight. It's not going to be our fight. So we will be grasses, most likely suffering. On that note, I just want to move on to the second one, which is more economics. We need to take advantage of China and Southeast Asia, as well as our good friends, United States and Australia. In fact, getting more involved with international trade. But to do that, we need to look internally first and assess how it has operated over the last 4 decades and explore new ways. Doing the same thing over and over, we fall into Albert Einstein's definition of insanity. So I think the Prime Minister was trying to put the country in a different direction, and the new members of Parliament and the new government. Think about not doing the same things we've done in the last 4 decades, but think differently. And I would want to see the China, US, or the superpower geographical political issue as a problem, but an opportunity that PNG should place itself to take advantage economically. One of the areas that I really would want to emphasize here is about structural impediments to PNG's growth. Identify them and act. And on that note, I want to just zoom it down on transport infrastructure. If we look at our domestic transport network, you will realize that PNG remains internally fragmented and externally isolated. We are completely isolated from the rest of the world. Internally, we are so fragmented. Without an integrated network, within and without, the opportunities will fly over PNG. In that case, we will become the grass in the African analogy, this time economically, not geopolitically. Transport networks are like the human skeleton system. A healthy skeleton system is critical, otherwise toes and fingers will become useless. If you destroy your spine, your legs won't work, or your neck, your arms, legs don't work. In my view, PNG's transport network is just toes and fingers, only with no connection to a structure. We have endless network of road transport systems that are actually a burden to the economy rather than an asset. There must be an economic activity that links the local economy to an international trade center. That understanding has been absent for many years in PNG. We need to relook at the way we get our transport network. When I'm talking transport, I'm talking air, sea, and land. Heavier things, they go by sea and air and land. Lighter things, they go by air. We need to think about how we integrate and connect this country strategically and place businesses strategically. I think Prime Minister alluded to in a positive way on that note. So practically, I want to bring our attention that PNG does not have to go too far to get this network globally and locally together. We'll just look at within ourselves here. PNG is linked by land to Southeast Asia, with Indonesia through our this is the second largest island in the world. And we often forget, as a country here, that we share a land border with one of those countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia. That's a land border. That's the only country we share land border. We share sea border with several countries, Australia, Solomon Islands, bit of New Zealand, Marianas and others up to the north. But with Indonesia, with West Papua, we have a land border. That's nicely linking to Southeast Asia, and of course China to the north, and Japan. South, we are only separated by a banana boat ride across the Torres Strait with Australia. So PNG should really look at internal integration and integration with our two closest neighbors, Australia and Indonesia. Indonesia would land with our relatives on the other side, West Papuans. How do we interact? And with our close neighbor, Australia. Through West Papua, PNG stands to connect well with the fastest growing part of this world, Southeast Asia. This opportunity it needs to be seriously explored. And PNG in Australia PNG, Australia, Indonesia, I think should start thinking about how we interact and really connect as those three nations within that we are close here. This links well with in fact, Australia's Northern Policy. And of course, China's One Belt Initiative. And Indonesia is already building up its side, West Papua. It's really PNG's turn to take this opportunity and see that we need to link up with get our transport network within and internal. And I think thinking about strategically linking up with Indonesia and Australia and would give us a better, and that was actually the article that the moderator is referring to. I wrote an article some time ago asking why not we open the island of New Guinea. And it lends itself, if you think about the island, it lends itself as a natural bridge between Southeast Asia, North, and our Pacific Islands to the east, and Australia and New Zealand to the south. It nicely sits in there. We need to think about how we can connect strategically and take advantage. Thank you.
And that's all we have for this episode of Business PNG. For more information, or if you would like to watch the episode again, visit EMTV online at the URL at the bottom of your screen, or to simply join the conversation, like our page on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter at the Twitter handle at Business PNG. Until next week, have a pleasant evening. I'm Leon Jarari, and this was Business PNG.